of amateur chamber music playing. I know how much fun and enriching that can be, and of chamber music generally. I've had really a wonderful life so far because of chamber music, as composer, administrator, and importantly as an audience member and a listener myself. I think probably the most unusual aspect of my life has been as a composer, that people think it's a rather exotic occupation. Composers don't feel that way, but others often do. I remember a couple of summers ago off at Marlborough, I was managing a concert, and a woman came up to me, I was talking to her, and she said, "Well, Philip, are you also a musician?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm a composer." She got this puzzled expression in her face, and she said, "Well, but you're still living." I'm glad you could tell, but it made me think that while I have as much respect and reverence for the great composers as anybody, I think it's instructive and useful to remember that they were flesh and blood, actual human beings, and makes, I think, their remarkable accomplishments all the more incredible. Over the last 30 years through my work, I've had this incredible opportunity to hear a huge number of chamber music concerts and performed by some of the greatest musicians in the world. Pieces from throughout the repertoire, early music, all of the standard repertory pieces numerous times, neglected pieces by major composers, contemporary music, 20th century works. It's really just been fascinating. And I think those of you who play chamber music will agree with me that it offers quite a number of really invaluable and broadly applicable life lessons that one, through chamber music, really learns how to listen, and listen in a different way. How to share, how to compromise, how to make one voice from many. I think these are lessons that are applicable to all fields, to all professions, I would say really to all human endeavors and social interactions, that we want to play our own role as well as possible, but ultimately sublimate that for the good of the whole. And I think that these qualities, this human scale of chamber music, are what make it so compelling and have made it so popular for composers. It's no surprise to me that many, in fact most of the great composers throughout history have written, I would say, their most profound, their most important, I would say their most exciting and expressive pieces for chamber music ensembles. Maybe a few exceptions in the late Romantic period with Wagner, Mahler, Tchaikovsky, but besides from them, almost all composers throughout history, from the Baroque and Renaissance era to the present day, it's had this really compelling impact on them. And I think this is why that this idea of the individual as part of this group and everyone working together and having this non-verbal kind of communication and the sense of trust in one another. If you think about a string quartet playing up on stage, they're just giving total trust to one another, and the dialogue that they have, this natural give and take, I think is really indicative of human interactions on a very personal and relatable scale. Through my work and over the years, I've come to think that what really makes for a successful performance, and certainly for a successful composition, is achieving a sense of balance. Now, I talked about the balance between the individual and the group, and that's an important component of it, but I think it goes even deeper than that. That there's sort of an inherent dichotomy in music that needs to be reconciled and brought together. That if you play a melodic line in a very dry, uninteresting way, well, the life of the line, the beauty of it gets lost. On the other hand, if you play it with too much expression, too schmaltzy, too much rubato, too loud, certainly the ensemble suffers, but also I think one loses the thread from what came before, what goes after. And this is, I think, a fascinating and central dichotomy in music generally. What my professors at the conservatory would describe as the difference between the foreground and the background of music, between what one is playing at any one time and having the understanding and the knowledge of how the piece is structured, how it's put together, the architecture of it, the mood of it. And as a musician, as a performing musician, one needs to keep these things very much in mind, I believe. That yes, you want to play your own part, your own melodic line, your own passage as well as possible, but always keep in mind what's coming up, what's transpired, what comes next, the key structural parts of music, the climaxes, and the mood. When I'm working with young composers, student composers, I often ask them to describe to me, okay, in this passage you've written, just describe to me in a few related words, what's the character, what's the mood? And it's kind of surprising at how often they can't do that. They just really haven't thought of it that way. But people can sort of overthink music, and I think to identify what that central character is of a passage is very important and useful. And for a composer, of course, balancing this dichotomy is all the more important. When I sit down to start a piece, and I have that ominous blank manuscript page in front of me, there are just a myriad number of possibilities, thousands, perhaps millions of different options. You know, think about pitch, and register, and rhythm, and instrumentation, and then as the piece develops, texture, and harmony, and form. All of these, very difficult, minute, meticulous decisions that have to be made, all of which are critically important to the piece. And yet, what is the goal? Really, it's to create something that's like a living organism, that exists in real time, that has shape and life and spontaneity. I would say almost improvisation. Music is sometimes described as informed improvisation. And so here you have this wonderful and fascinating and endlessly challenging dichotomy between the sheer work involved in preparing a piece and figuring out the details and creating something that when it exists in real time will sound very natural, will have a wonderful flow to it, and which will seem, in a way, improvised. I think that the whole issue of pacing is one that people don't think quite enough about in music. A few clicks of the metronome can just change the character of a piece of music indelibly and can be the difference between success or failure. I might spend a week or two literally working every day very hard on a passage that will ultimately be 40 or 50 seconds in real time. And my teachers back at the conservatory would distinguish between psychological time and real time, that when you're being audited by the IRS, it's a little bit different, the time, than when you're having a candlelight dinner in Paris. And here too, if one is listening to a piece of music that really has a beautiful flow to it, I think the sense of time can really be lost. And this is what I believe we are trying to accomplish as composers and as musicians. I would say also that when you listen to a great piece of music, when you listen to a late Beethoven quartet or a great Schubert quartet, that you're really taken on this journey that is more experiential and sensory than intellectual. In fact, I would argue, I know others disagree with this, but I believe that if the intellect is consciously stimulated in a performance, then something's really lost. That if you're listening to a piece of music and you think to yourself, well, gee, what is he doing here? Where is he going with this? I can't quite figure this out. Or conversely, if you say, oh yeah, I recognize this, been there, done that, this is pretty simplistic. There too, your intellect is being engaged in a way that I think is really distracting. When you listen to this great music, the Schubert and Beethoven, you're taken on this seamless journey, this emotional transformation that takes you from one place to another. Now, it's not, of course, without surprises, and great music has surprises throughout it. One never really knows where one's going, and that makes it very interesting. And of course, the intellect is a very critical component of writing music and of playing music. But the experience of music itself, I think, transcends that. And to me, that's what makes it really just so special and so compelling, and what draws people to chamber music.